Okay. So for those of you who kind of follow my Instagram and things like that, or know me personally, you know I'm a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons. And I've been a part of a small group since about 2016, mostly homebrew campaigns actually. But today I decided to talk about how over time I discovered lore and how far Dungeons and Dragons kind of goes back, especially with the amount of history and things behind it. It's actually really interesting. But eventually I came across this book called Vampire of the Mists by Christie Golden as a part of the Ravenloft modules, which were very popular during second edition and first edition. I'm not sure about third and fourth. I heard that in fourth edition they was going to do like this massive revival module for it, but it never went through. And I decided to read this as my next read, mostly because it intrigued me the most, and me and James were a huge fan of the current sort of Ravensloft stuff. Like, I love Gothic horror. Gothic horror is just amazing to me, and I could talk about that for hours. Like, I got the 5th edition Strahd module as my starting point, and when I started going through the book and things, I liked some of the more minor characters like Etcher, and the way the Strahd is sort of talked about. It's very much like Dracula, but it's different enough that you can differentiate it and kind of mould him into your own sort of view, which is why I was very interested to see how she wrote back in the 90s. I think it was 2nd edition, how she wrote Strahd in her books, and how there are similarities and the differences in the setting of Barovia in this book compared to, let's say, the 5th edition. But as like a sort of disclaimer, with this book, with what I've read so far, I'm only, I think, on chapter 9 out of 26, I think. And from what I've read so far, it does capture the actual essence of what makes it a horror book very well. Like, the writing in it is a good style. It's a style that I can read very easily. It's a style I write in. So there's a lot of description, and then it will go into sort of parts where it gives you a relief with how people talk, the sort of actions they use. And I was actually very interested in this book because of a character called Jander Sunstar. Now, Jander Sunstar, I came across him actually from one of the module books that my brother collected, since after we got the original 5th edition, we started to look more into Ravensloft as a setting, and it turned out it was this massive thing with domains of dread, lots of other sort of evil people based off other Gothic literature, things like that. And we started off, I think he got this one called Children of the Night, and it's basically vampires as like an accessory for all campaign settings, it says here. But it'd be important to know that this wasn't done by Wizards of the Coast. This was done by the company that used to own it, called TSR. And the very first vampire we can come across is Jander Sunstar. And he's got a little illustration there. It's got his stats. It's all very lovely. And as I was reading through it, it's like a mini little adventure that you can go on a random encounter with him. And it kind of invested me into this character, and I wanted to find out more about who was he, as well as you've got other cool people like Larissa von Zarovich, who's kind of a relative to Strahd, which is cut out of the 5th edition. I did start to realise, as I went through all these different sort of 2E modules that you can sort of still buy, they're a bit pricey because they're discontinued, but there's a lot more stuff to them that 5th edition throws out because they don't exactly want to connect it. It's really weird. I don't know what they're doing. Like, some of the stuff they do at like Wizards of the Coast is really good, and sometimes it's just a bit, are you sure? Like, the character Etcher in 5th edition as like a new thing was added as Strahd's consort apart from the 3 other women that he has sort of in his lair. And he's quite an interesting character. I think there needs to be more support on that. But even then, we then moved on to like the Realm of Terror box set, which is kind of mainly for Strahd, but it has all of the other lands in it. It's all very interesting, and there's even a time, I think, there was even a time that they did a Gothic Earth as a bigger expansion to the Domains of Dread. They kept saying it was a part of the Domains of Dread, but then you actually read the module, it is its own thing. It's meant to be Earth at a certain time period in the Victorian era, and it's kind of more supernatural based, and rather than having classes, you had sort of social class, like labourer, noble, detective, that sort of thing, which is still all rather really cool. I think so anyway, to the main point of the book, he appears in a lot of material, like especially in the 2E sort of stuff, and I always found it really interesting, so it was very interesting for me to start reading this. And I was very pleasantly surprised. I thought usually with like books based off games, they can be very hard to read or just really bad. But with this one, it came across like a proper novel. Like you didn't need to know Dungeons and Dragons or Ravenloft very well to actually read it. And from what I have so far, it actually gave me more information on what Barovia was like in this person's head in general. There are a lot of the characters are actually made by the author. I followed the author on Twitter, and she invented Jander as a character first, before he then became this kind of big deal. He was kind of pushed with Strahd as this sort of opposite, where Jander is this sort of elf, gold elf, with, you know, very beautiful and tries to hold himself back and the evil within him desperately. Strahd embraces it and is very much the, you know, the evil of the land, and he keeps trying to corrupt Jander over, especially when Jander arrives in the story into Barovia through the mists. The mists play a big part in this book, and it's kind of, especially in the 5th edition module, you can tell how in the older editions they were done as box sets, so you'd get loads of extra things as well as booklets. But in the 5th edition ones, they do them as massive hardbacks with maps that you can kind of rip off. I think the change in style really does show, because there's elements with lots of more pretty, colourful art to sort of get you going, but there's less stuff on what makes the world work. As I said, the Domains of Dread, for example, are completely absent from 5th edition. Not sure why, because there is references to it. Like there's a toy maker they added into the Barovian town, which pays a reference to, I think, The Created? I'm not sure, but there was a town in the Domains of Dread where it's basically an evil Pinocchio story, and it's very interesting. But in this, they kind of keep it to the idea that it's one town, and a lot of the characters in it aren't the characters you meet in a campaign setting. The ones you meet in a campaign setting are set in the future, I believe, because that's when, you know, you actually go to try and defeat Strahd, while this is set kind of more back in time, where Jander is kind of in his history. And from what I've written so far, I've already made observations on who I think that there's like this big plot point about him falling in love with someone called Anna, and Anna was at the kind of Swords Coast setting, I believe, Waterdeep's city, in their asylum, and he kind of fell in love with her, and they were gonna like try and get together. He was going to treat her and try and help her in her situation, but then she ended up catching an illness and passing away, and this infuriates him, of course, and he does do some very bad things which he regrets, which is good. We like a character with flaws, especially a vampire sort of character like this. He's kind of the first time that, especially I think you've got to consider the time it was written in the 90s, that it's one of those first times that you can go, wow, this is a vampire that knows he's flawed and wants to try and change, but doesn't hide it from the fact that, if he does something bad, he accepts that that's a part of what he is. He doesn't make a big deal out of it. He's just like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I'll have to try and do better next time. He's one of those sort of people, and that's what I prefer from a vampire sort of character. Strahd is, in this book, very as expected, especially from the modules. Now, everyone's going to have their own view on how Strahd will be in a campaign setting. So I did wonder, what was that like, as a process of working for the author herself when she started writing this book? Because I think she did a really good job. She really captures his sort of more carnivoral sort of, very vicious attitude and views on things. Like, when he's welcomed as a guest, a black carriage pulls up, but it has no driver. It's very Dracula inspired. But when he's there and he is hungry, he offers him a woman named Christina on like her bed and stuff, and said like, oh, and she's like, oh, I was picked, because I'm still, kind of fresh, haven't been touched before. And then he's very much like, which kind of creeped me out as someone, nowadays, I'm just like, oh, that's not very good. But Jander surprisingly did not fall for it. He was very much like, thanks, I'll drink from you, but I won't hurt you, sort of thing. And I'm kind of glad about that. I am worried though that she'll probably die within the next few chapters, because you can't trust Strahd. He's evil, he's nasty, no one should stand him. And I am actually really enjoying the book overall. I think, especially if you're into Ravenloft, try to find this, because it is a good read. But I do think the audio is cheaper, because I don't think they actually still do the book as a continuation, since TSR, I believe, used to obviously print it. And because they don't exist anymore, you kind of need to expect Wizards of the Coast to do something about that. I also got this book because, if you're like me, someone who's really now into Jander Sunstar's character, you kind of want to know what happens next with him as a person, because he does have a wiki page on Forgotten Realms, and I did check it out, and this does take place as sort of prior to his appearance in Children of the Night. However, he does appear in 5th edition, and I was quite shocked by this. I was like, well, where? I've never seen him. And it turns out it was in Baldur's Gate, which was, Descent into Avernus, which was really weird. Now, this is probably going to be a spoiler moment, so, if you want to skip ahead a little bit, feel free to. But it kind of aggravated me that this character had been in so many modules, had been hinted at, and had books written about him consistently, and was this invention of this very author, who the fans adored. Like, I think it was the first gold elf vampire that we could ever have seen. Like, an elven vampire was a new concept. And Wizards of the Coast, for the sake of doing a cameo, threw him in and put him in a very dire scenario, claiming that, to do with Baldur's Gate, like Descent into Avernus, like the Hell Riders backstory stuff, that he joined them, but then he's one of the people that, this is real spoiler stuff now, that he left them behind like a coward or something. And I was very confused by that, because that does not sound like the way Jander is written here or in any of the modules. In fact, I don't even know if he would have joined them. And they kind of did it for the sake of a cameo. And he appears in one area on a spike tree. Just, spike through him. And if you move him, bad things will happen to your character. But he begs you to set him free and all this. And it completely destroys the original arc of who he was as a character. He was someone who wanted to be let free, you know, in the sense of no longer be a vampire. He didn't want to die, essentially. He just wanted to be the person he once was, and was accepting the fact that this is the sort of person he is now. And he had this whole arc developing for him over 2E, 3E, 4E, and they destroyed it in 5E with that. Like, he's dead now then, you know, he's in hell, he's being punished, but it doesn't make sense. You've just cut off and thrown out the entirety and importance of what this book meant for the author and for writers such as myself. That was a huge no-no. Like, when I found that out, I was on my D&D group chat, and was just complaining to everyone who had no interest in this whatsoever about how angry I was about it. Like, I get it. In the end, it's because I wanted a famous face for the sake of selling the book a bit more. But he could have been in Strahd. He could have been in the 5th edition Curse of Strahd. Why wasn't he? We don't know. He could have been a really cool addition. He could have been a player character option, or he could have been suggested to be an NPC that helps you along the way. Especially with the 5th edition, they added it and made it a bigger setting. Barovia, a bigger setting with more towns, more locations, more artifacts, and it bulks up the story. So why wasn't he there? They took things like the Ravenkind symbol. That appears at the beginning of the book in the prologue. It doesn't get named as that, but I've guessed it's that. I could be wrong, but I really don't think I am in this case, because, yeah. It just confused me. Which is also one of the reasons why, obviously, I read the book. I'm reading the book right now. But overall, I am really enjoying it. It is hard to write Strahd as a character, because obviously everyone's going to have different versions. And he is written to be a campaign bad guy. But she does a good job. She takes a lot of inspiration from Dracula, as I said. There isn't really hints of any of the brides, which appear in the 5th edition module. I think they appeared in comics, and maybe some of the Strahd books. I haven't read or looked into those, so you can't quote me on that. But overall, it's a good read. I think it probably sounds quite good in audio, especially if all you can get hold of. I think I got this off eBay. Yeah. Not much more I can say right now, because obviously I'm still reading it. But it is fun, like, going through the lore of Ravenloft in general. Especially interesting how it does name a lot of locations mentioned in the module, like the big gates where there's the soldiers, the stone soldiers, which heads are missing and things like that. There are mentions of that. Yet, for example, the black carriage with no driver, the horses and stuff, it's all described like, to pick people up. But if you look in like the modules now, it shows him as this more different sort of character, where his horses aren't just black horses, they're like fire horses, and it's all like undead horses and things like that. Like, there are little differences and rooms that don't appear in the new maps, things like that. But I think overall it captures it so well. So I'm just hoping it will continue to please me with the story. Like, it doesn't hold back on the sort of gritty sadness of what Ravenloft is. You're drawn into the mist. If you're a traveller, you're most likely gonna die. It's not nice. And there is a sense of hopefulness with his character that you kind of need in a book like this. So, yeah. I think that's all I'm going to say on the matter at the moment, because obviously I am only just started reading this. I'd love to do a video in the future, maybe when I complete this book, but also maybe on the modules that my brother got, because they're so good. As I said, the lore continues on and on. and they really do need to bring it back. And I would personally, if it was me, love to see perhaps them doing books again like this, for example, you know, writing more lore for the 5th edition sort of stuff, rather than just missing out on the opportunity, you know, that could hold them back a little bit. Because I know that they've got like other methods now. They've got Critical Role and endorsements and things like that. You know, you've got Wildemont, things like that. But it would be nice to see maybe some more endorsements through other ways, through like book publishing again, because that would be quite cool. Anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it off. So thanks for joining, and I'll probably see you all whenever I next upload. So goodbye.